Welcome to The Human Element, presented by Whisk. I'm your host, Barb Bidan, and in each episode, I sit down with CHROs and senior HR leaders to explore how AI, innovation, and human insight are reshaping the future of HR. We'll explore how technology is reshaping leadership, strategy, and the role of HR by sharing candid stories, practical ideas, and strategic perspectives to help you shape the future. The Human Element is brought to you by Whisk, the leader in agentic HR and creator of Harper, the world's first AI HR generalist. Learn how Harper can resolve up to 80% of routine HR tasks autonomously. Learn more about Whisk at whisk.com. My guest today is Christine Aldrich. Christine is the Chief People Officer at Pindrop. Christine has built her HR career at companies like Dunkin Brands, where she became known for weaving people strategy directly into business outcomes. Now, she leads people at Pindrop, a company on the front lines of voice security and deepfake detection, which means that she sits in a uniquely strange seat. She runs HR at a company building the technology to catch the very kind of fraud that her own recruiting team and probably all of ours has had to defend against. And that is exactly what we're here to talk about today. Deepfakes, fake candidates, and what hiring really looks like when you can no longer assume that the person on the other end of the camera is who they say they are. Christine, I am super excited to talk about this. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much, Barb. And I can guarantee that I am a real person.
Fantastic. Me too. I've also led recruiting teams. And so I am genuinely and deeply very interested in the topic. And we'll cover a few other things too. But before we hop in, I really think that our listeners appreciate understanding a little bit more deeply who we are talking to. And so I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit more about your background, your path to becoming a CPO, and how you ended up at the company that is building deepfake detection technology.
Sure. So I like to say that I am in the rare category that I've always known that HR and people operations is what I wanted to do my entire career. I didn't happen to fall into it or get pulled into it in another way. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. And so growing up, I really saw how the relationship drove the business. And for me, that just really kind of equated to human resources. So that is what I went to my undergrad and my master's certificate for was human resources management, international business, and organizational design. Right out of college, just like every single person, my very first job was HR director, and I totally believe I learned more in those first 4 weeks than I did in any 4 years of college that could have ever taught me. That is the world of HR that we live in, right? No 2 days are the same. I grew up in Michigan, and kind of the joke is they do not let you out of the state until you work for one of the big three. So I worked at Ford Motor Company for a while and survived the automotive downturn and realized that industry is not where I wanted to stay. So I did a complete pivot and went into QSR, or quick service restaurants, and that's where I was at Dunkin Brands. I was at Dunkin Brands when they went IPO, and then I got a call that said, here is a once-in-a-career opportunity. Come work at the startup, and it will be life-changing. And Barb, I totally took that line, hook and sinker, because I totally believed them, and now I'm at my fourth startup. So the first one was through education technology. The second one was through real estate technology. The third was through sales technology. And then when I was at my last company prior to this, I got the call for the opportunity at Pindrop. And making this shift to Pindrop was really about being more intentional about being in a technology-focused environment. It's one that really closely ties with the HR challenges that we are facing today, because the company is really fundamentally addressing an issue of trust. Trust in the digital interactions across banking, across many other services, and of course, across interviewing, recruiting, and human resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, so can relate on the startup front. And I also can relate because we grew up as neighbors, probably. I was right across the border in Windsor, Ontario.
Absolutely.
So we love our friends from Michigan. So
100%.
So I'm super excited to dive in, actually. So something that you've been quoted as saying is that fraudsters are now using AI-generated resumes, fake online profiles, and even deepfaked faces. I have heard the stories too, and voices, deepfake voices too, to apply for remote jobs. Like, it's wild out there. So how big has this problem actually gotten? And when did you first realize, as like an HR professional, that it had crossed a line?
Yeah, it's a great question, Barb. So we, as a recruiting team, came across our first fraudulent candidate in December of 24. And so we were sitting around a meeting and I had a recruiter say, is this actually what we think this is? And that was proven to be true. So at that point, going into 2025, we were actively seeking out these deep fake candidates in our own recruiting pipeline. And I had gone to an HR conference in March of 25, went to the same HR conference this past year. And when I first went, I was showing pictures of these deep fake candidates and videos of them. And they were like, no way, that's crazy, would never happen to me. Fast forward a year later, everybody has a story. So the problem has grown so much faster than people realize. What started to feel like this edge case, maybe it was a suspicious resume, maybe it was a candidate that just didn't quite line up, has quickly become something that we're seeing with real frequency. Our data shows that nearly 1 in 6 applicants show some sign of data manipulation, whether it's AI generated content, synthetic identity signals, fake LinkedIn profiles, or fake applications. It's really become clear that this is a recruiting challenge that is a much broader trust issue. When you can no longer trust that the person that is sitting across from you is a real person, who they say they are, it forces you to change your mindset about hiring.
100%. And especially since we've all gone so digital too. Yeah. I mean, I've worked in companies where our processes have been fully digital as well, right? So I am hearing that a lot of people are rethinking the role of an in-person interview as a necessary stage in the process, but also obviously the technology that helps prevent it. So I am super curious, since I don't know that we're not set up to have brought a picture today, but since you did bring a picture to when you went to the HR conferences recently, what does a deepfake candidate actually look like in a real interview? Like, what are you guys actually catching and seeing out there?
Yeah. And it can look different in a lot of different ways, depending on how advanced the technology is. So in some cases, it can be fairly obvious, right? The voice is not lining up with the lip movement. There could be a lag. There could be like a digital background. You can see other things that are popping out of the screen. Those are very, very obvious. But more and more, these candidates are looking very strong with very strong resumes and well-prepared applicants. The technology has advanced so rapidly that these candidates show up very, very polished. They have credible online profiles, which used to be another flag, and they communicate very clearly and confidently. So on the surface, this pattern really raises the concerns. But what we've also seen is that while everything might seem normal at first, things don't quite line up over time. And that is something that we've never really had to face before in the hiring world, right? I mean, who used to verify that it was the same person at every single stage of a process, right? I mean,
right. And they're meeting different people on your side too. So who is going to do that actually?
Exactly, Barb. You're exactly right. And we never really would have to think about that. But now that is absolutely something that we have to ensure that the same person with the same credentials, with the same voice, mannerisms, and background all show up through every single stage of the hiring process. It's not just because it's become one red flag. It starts with this pattern of small inconsistencies, but as the technology gets better, like these inconsistencies get harder to detect for the human eye, and it's a lot of pressure to put on a recruiter in order to assume that that person is not accurate.
I mean, it is a lot of pressure to put on a recruiter who's moving very, very quickly. And you said something a minute ago that I am kind of extra curious about is so if the technology is detecting things like data manipulation using AI, which I guess when the word manipulation is in there, maybe it like feels like a negative connotation, but it might not always be, right? Like we actually know that candidates are rightfully and probably necessarily using AI and preparing applications. Is there a way to tell the difference between, this candidate used the help of AI, which might be good, right? It shows they're AI curious, et cetera, right? But versus like they've gone into like creating something that's a complete like fabrication.
Mm-hmm. Another great question. So at Pindrop, we expect AI usage, right? So we are an AI company. We expect AI usage, but so much so that we have AI fluency as one of our behavioral competencies.
Yeah, we do too.
So exactly. So we fully expect and want people to be using AI as an adoption, right?
Yep.
When they start to manipulate who they are, their background of work history, they have copied somebody else's LinkedIn profile, you can actually see that a lot of the deepfake candidates that we went and sought out have the exact same resume template that they just copy and paste and use over and over and over again. And they're using that same resume template with different names to apply for your jobs multiple times. I mean, so it's being able to be a little bit part detective when you're going through that in order to identify where AI has taken it and broken the level of trust versus ensuring the level of trust, which is what we expect through the hiring process.
Totally. I've heard that sort of fraudsters have kind of ruined this old startup resume. I think originated from Andreessen Horowitz, and it's like it's like the perfect tech resume is now ruined because all the fraudsters. That's like the one, right, that they're copying. I say this because I also coach and do career coaching, and used to be able to recommend that as a resume template, and I know not to do that anymore. So we're going to find a new one of those. But we went a little bit into like it's the tech industry, but I'm curious, is this a tech industry problem, or is this a problem that's showing up elsewhere in other more traditional industries too?
Yeah. I think early on, it was more concentrated on the tech industry, especially in roles that were remote and maybe relatively easy to access from anywhere. But again, as I have seen in the past 12 months alone, that has absolutely changed over time. We are increasingly seeing this play out across multiple industries. Any role that can be done remotely and any company that relies on virtual hiring should be thinking about these risks. It doesn't matter if it's finance or healthcare or customer support. It's really any organization that is hiring at scale. And a result is this risk is the opportunity, and the opportunity is everywhere. And Barb, you mentioned something that was really interesting. You were saying that a lot of companies are thinking about going back to in-person hiring. We, as a fully remote organization, I think that would be really challenging on our organization, our business, not just from a cost standpoint, but from a human capital standpoint. We don't have the leaders having the ability to take time to travel in, to interview their people in person. I mean, I think that just detracts from the velocity of a business. Therefore, we have got to find out a way in order to ensure that we bring trust back to the hiring process.
I fully agree. I mean, I actually hadn't even thought about the fact that in a remote company, you're sending two people. You can tell how few in-person interviews I've been doing also, right? Or where it has been happening, it's like you're co-located in the same city, or someone's in an office, so one person's traveling. But in a remote company, not only would you go back to like pre-COVID times of like really expensive travel budgets associated with recruiting, you'd double it in a remote company. And also, where are you going if you're actually remote? I mean, where are you sending the candidate and the manager to meet, right? So it is, I mean, that's why I think we love, right, that there are companies like Pindrop that are coming up with technology-based solutions to help us with this stuff. Because I agree, just saying everyone will do an in-person interview is clearly not the answer. So I want to dive in on recruiters a little bit more, right? Because it makes the job of recruiter. I've led recruiting teams, and their job is hard and it's fast paced. And there's a lot of things from managing relationships to managing technology and process and all of these things. And now this, right? So recruiters are trained to be unbiased also, right? We're training them to not be like noticing things about the features of someone in a video that might actually like call into question whether they're fake, right? We're taught to not doubt things like accents, language, like a shady internet connection that's in and out, right? And how does that training need to evolve when some of these signals might actually be the fraud that we're experiencing today?
Yeah, this is one point that I love to talk about, because I think that it is the fundamental aspect, the human element of hiring, and we don't want to lose that. But that is what you said was absolutely true, Barb, and that is that we have trained recruiters in order to be unbiased for so long. And you mentioned accents and communication style, or having a technical glitch. We've asked them to reserve judgment and instead just put those things to the side and focus on the skill evaluation. What's changing is that we cannot rely on those signals to be authentic anymore. Things like laggy communication or an unusual speech pattern used to be easy to explain, but now they are really actually could be signs of manipulation. So we absolutely need to actually introduce technology that verifies identity so that recruiters don't have to rely on human judgment alone. It's actually somewhat ironic in my mind because it's like you want to introduce technology that can verify identity in order to keep the human aspect of the process, right? So recruiters should still be able to evaluate candidates based on skills and experience, but it's the identity piece that has to become more reliable and provide some support to recruiters as they're going through this process. Because otherwise, it's just not fair to ask recruiters to make those calls on their own and actually risk the business. What if they get it wrong? That's too much pressure when we are not providing them with the tools they need in order to accurately identify identity in candidates.
Right. I mean, that is the downside risk of recruiters trying to catch this purely by like visual identification is sure, will it catch some fraud? Yes. But what else is going to get caught in that net that you don't want caught? And so it deserves to get through. It's actually scary to me to think about having to have recruiters be in that position. I'm sure it's scary to them. It's like, it's a lot of pressure, but it also, like, I think we've gotten recruiters to a place where they really are the unbiased skill evaluators for us, right? Trying to do the right thing. We can't go back to them and be like, oh, just kidding, right? Like, actually,
No,
please start visually IDing a bunch of stuff that we just told you was like really not a fair and equitable way to hire, right? So again, love the technology solutions. So outside of technology, right, there are probably some practical solutions that a recruiting team could put into place. So what is something small that a recruiting team that's maybe just starting to think about, oh, this could be happening to me? What's a small thing that a team could look at or consider, like Monday morning?
Yeah. I think that a simple add of a lightweight identity check earlier in the process could just be helpful, right? So for example, confirming, a person's basic details are consistent across stages, as we talked about, or having a second level of verification outside of the main interview flow could be something that is simple and lightweight that you could add to the actual interview process. I know I mentioned consistency checks, but that is something else that I think that is really important, in particular on technical roles. When you're asking a candidate to do an assessment, right? You want to make sure that the same person shows up across every interaction. What that requires is a recruiter to join maybe the first, 3 minutes of an interview when the candidate joins, along with the hiring manager or whoever's at the next stage of the interview process, just for that quick verification. I think that it takes some of the guesswork out of the authenticity of identification. And that way, recruiters are just not relying on instinct.
Well, and I think probably where you were going, right, with the recruiter joining, I think might lead into sort of my next question, like the recruiter being on for 3 minutes. Like, what are some ways that you can do this verification and do it in a way where it doesn't become a hostile experience, right? Where it would, like, we're supposed to be providing an amazing candidate experience, not one that's like off-putting to candidates. Mm-hmm. So how can you play that in terms of like the recruiter joining or doing that identity verification so that it feels like a positive part of the process?
Yep. I think the first part is actually to be transparent. I think that we need to let candidates know upfront that we have a verification process and the steps that we have in place are there to both protect them and the company, right? I think a lot of people, if they understand why upfront, it becomes a lot less adversarial. And if you think about it, Barb, we identify or we confirm our identification all the time. If you call your bank, if you're doing a transaction online, if you're calling your cell phone provider, in some way, shape, or form, you have to verify who you are. And I think that that's just going to become an organic part of the interview and the hiring process, So the way that we think about it at Pindrop is the goal is to move the verification into the background as much as possible, instead of necessarily asking the candidate more questions, which to your point could then just be adding friction to the interview process itself, right? Mm-hmm. Pindrop's technology runs seamlessly in the background of virtual calls and that confirms identity without having to interrupt the flow of conversation. I always think about the candidate experience so much because, somebody is interviewing for a job. They're naturally nervous. They are, could be anxious. And so if I can remove that piece and continue to make it as comfortable and seamless as a process as possible, I think that we owe that actually to our candidates.
Yeah. And I think if you're using the recruiter example, right, with a recruiter joining a call for a few minutes, right, that friendly face where the candidate's already met the recruiter, right, if they're in subsequent interviews, and the recruiter being able to just be that calming factor, right, like welcoming the candidate, kind of what coordinators used to do when we did all the in-office interviews, right? Like we could just go back to, that whole welcoming experience that we had in interviews, like back in the olden days. But I also think as we've been talking, like to your point, like your ID is checked all over the place. Like you're talking and I'm going, it is kind of odd, right? That we've been making such important decisions, like even before AI, right? Like we were making very important decisions with very like loose information about the person until the day that they show up and do like a 9-9 for like US, like in the US, right? Where you do, like that's the first time that you actually validate that the person you've talked to is who they say they are, and was that the same person who even interviewed. I mean, not to scare everyone, but like it does make sense. It does make sense.
Open. You're absolutely leaving the front door open. And we in companies do so much security training after you're hired. And in this instance, you are literally leaving the front door open for a fraudster to gain access to your company. And that is another reason why having this, technology that can verify your identity is so essential, in particular in this digital age.
Well, I feel like we've been talking about like a few different juxtapositions in this conversation. So there's another strange irony here, right? Like the AI is the threat, but it's also the defense from a tech perspective. How are you thinking about where AI belongs on your side of the hiring table and where it crosses a line?
Yeah. It's another great point. So, I like to think of AI as the support system, that will help pick up on the signals that a human might miss, right? Especially when those signals, as we talked about, are so subtle or spread across multiple interactions. So that's where it adds the real value because it takes the burden off of the recruiter. I would say that it crosses the line when it starts to replace human judgment in evaluating candidates. Yes, we can use AI in order to help, sort through resumes and pare down, how many applications we are getting. Because I know every recruiter is now faced with triple, if not 4 times the amount of applicants in every single job application due to AI and fraudulent candidates. But I always want hiring to come back to the people, right? I want us as humans to be able to understand a person's potential, assessing their fit, building relationships, understanding if they are a culture match, We don't want AI making those types of decisions or filtering candidates out in a way that is not transparent or fair, So I think the balance is using AI to verify the process while still keeping humans at the very center of the talent recruitment process. One will help you trust who you're actually talking to, and then the other, the human, helps you decide if they are the right person for the role.
Agreed. You need both completely. I'm curious to get a little bit more into even like AI use within your team. How is your team using AI to make the recruiting process faster and better for your candidates?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I think a lot of teams now have some sort of AI in their ATS or as a bolt-on product in order to help to sort through resumes based on, skill match, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, that is absolutely helping us to save time and create efficiencies. But I think that instead of our recruiters having to second guess, we use our own technology through every single interaction and interview process in order to understand whether that candidate is real, instead of spending time in order to identify inconsistencies, right? It helps our recruiters confirm that the person on the other end of the interaction is actually just who they say that they are, and so that they don't have to rely on instinct and spend additional time worrying about authenticity. And in my mind, I actually think that actually makes the process go faster and in a different way, because they're not spending time validating these things with the candidate. Instead, they're actually spending more time having conversation and identifying if they are a right fit for the role. I think it removes the fear from our candidates' mindset that they are the ones that have to verify that that is an actual person on the other end and can really concentrate on the job that they've been tasked with.
Yeah, it's almost like, as you were talking, I was thinking about a checklist, right? It's like using the AI to do the things that belong on a checklist, allowing the human to do the things that belong in the human space, like getting to build a relationship.
Exactly right.
So, I mean, when the hiring process becomes a security perimeter, which we did talk about it as it needs to be, right? It is the front door, right? But real candidates, right? If we do this wrong, real candidates are going to sort of pay the price. And I'm thinking about what the human cost of this is on the candidate side and how we keep hiring from feeling like an interrogation versus a conversation. And I'm curious if what are you hearing back about how candidates are experiencing a validation process? Like, is there feedback that you get from like a company and product standpoint, or feedback that your own recruiting team is getting? How's this landing with the people we are interviewing?
Yeah. I mean, on a scale, we have very, very, very few candidates. And trust me, we do interview a lot. Come back and question the verification process. And the other thing is that we give them a choice. It's not, if you choose not to verify the process, we understand and we respect that. But that is part of our hiring process. And we can meet with that person and explain that process in more detail in order to get them more comfortable. And if they choose to opt out, we respect that fully, because the last thing that we want is for a candidate to feel like they're being interrogated instead of evaluated. Again, it should be this conversation that we have between these two humans, right? So we're trying to, again, separate the security process from the actual hiring process as much as possible. We're trying to move it into the background and use technology so that it impacts the candidate less directly. Because at the end of the day, it should be about trust. And we really want to preserve this trust on both sides. The stronger the verification doesn't have to mean that hiring has to be cold and impersonal. It should just be making it about being safer and more consistent. And actually, I believe that it helps to have the candidate on the other receiving end understand that we're not taking time interviewing false candidates either, right? So that they can understand that we are only spending time and committing to interviewing the real candidates that verify their identity on the other end.
Yeah, I go back to, if you're doing the right thing as a candidate, you should actually feel really good about this. It might just take a minute to stop and think about it, right? The first time you're asked to submit to like some identification validation, right? It's just a new experience that at first you might be like, oh, this is new. But if you think about it, if you're on the good side of this, it is helpful to you. It is a good thing, right? It's keeping those that are being disingenuous, fraudulent, like out of the process so that the good folks can get the jobs, right? So I think it's ultimately a good thing. I mean, I do love hiring. As I said, I've led recruiting teams, right? So I could talk about this actually all day, but I'm going to bring us to the end of our time together on a quick lightning round, some quick hit questions. So just sort of first thing that pops into mind for each of these, what is the first red flag that might tell you a candidate isn't real?
Yeah, I think that the first red flag is the mismatch, right? So it's a mismatch between what you're seeing and what you're hearing, and you're seeing that they're just not lining up. That's usually the first sign that something's off.
Great. And so next question, one trick that every recruiter should be using, and I want to change the word trick. So what is one tactic? Let's say it sounds more, I don't want to seem like we're tricking candidates. So what's one tactic that every recruiter could be using on every video interview starting tomorrow?
Yeah. I go back to the consistency process, and I actually loved your comparison of the coordinator back in the day. I actually think that if we are verifying it as the same person through every single step of the process, that is something that is low lift, that will help us and identify that that is a real person through every single stage of the interview process. And to your point, I think actually helps to make the candidate feel a little bit more confident as they're going through the process themselves.
Yeah. And we could, if we don't have technology in place that's doing the detection for us, this is something we could start on Monday and start doing until we can get like really great tech in place to also help us from that perspective too. So what would you say is the most overrated tool in fighting candidate fraud?
LinkedIn profiles.
I mean, there are some fake LinkedIn profiles out there.
It is
for sure. It is. Getting
to be a big issue.
That's been a problem before AI, and we'll leave it at that. But next question is, what is a real human skill that no deepfake will ever be able to get right.
Yeah. AI is great and it can replace, a face, a voice, create an amazing resume. But I just think that it cannot replace humanity. And I think that curiosity, empathy, spontaneity, the conversation that you have with a candidate, it's just so hard to replace that. I like to say, like AI could be able to fake identity. It just cannot fake humanity.
Like it a lot. So finish this sentence for me. The recruiters who survive the deepfake era are the ones who blank.
Build trust and don't rely on instinct.
Awesome. And so as we were talking, I try to do a half decent job of capturing some of the very best things that I caught and I'm taking away. So I'll give that a whirl to kind of bring us home. So the first thing that I got is that there is a place for human judgment in detecting fraudulent behavior. So the thing that felt safest in what you described is watching for small clues. So it's when little things don't add up, right? It's not just obvious fraud, but it's manipulation and so forth. So when there is a pattern of things that just seems off, that might be a reason to create question in your mind. So that was first. But then second, it's that you can't really do this properly, well, equitably without technology, because otherwise, how would what's happening affect what we've been teaching recruiters about not being biased and being the ones who bring fairness and equity to the process? So the tech helps recruiters to maintain that unbiased viewpoint while the tech actually detects the things that might be indicative of fraud happening. And then tying those two things together was kind of the third, is that ultimately you do need both together, that the answer is a combination of AI plus human judgment. So I have really, really enjoyed our conversation today, but I always leave guests with the final word. So I'm going to do that here. What is something that you want every HR leader who just listened to us chat today to continue to think about on the rest of their drive home?
Yeah, thank you, Barb. I enjoyed this conversation so much as well. The thing that I want, HR leaders and recruiters and those that hire for their organizations is to really think about for so long, hiring has been designated like about giving the candidates the benefit of the doubt,
Mm-hmm.
And I love that about us and I love that about our profession. But it's really changing about the signals that we've historically relied on, like what someone says, how they sound, how they present, are actually no longer reliable on their own. And it's not about, wanting to, again, introduce like so much scrutiny and security into the process. It's how do we build processes that let us stay fair and human while still being confident about who we're interacting with. So I would just say that if HR leaders can like really start to reframe their hiring mindset that way, then they'll be in a better position to navigate what's coming next in technology and AI, is in particular as it continues to evolve at the rapid pace that it is, and help to change the way that we do things.
Such great advice. It was a pleasure having you on the show, Christine. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
Thanks so much, Barb. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on The Human Element, presented by Whisk. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow The Human Element wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Barb Bidan. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.